Looking over the camera.
All right, third time is a charm. We got this. So, the Real Elite team is definitely looking for a producer to help out on the show. So if you're a producer and you want to come record with us, then baby, come record with us because we got the setup and we just need the talent.
Pretty good pitch there, Kirk.
Speaking of talent, I got my friend Sean Doherty over here, all the way from
Hong Kong.
What the fuck, man?
Yes, that's right. Hong Kong, baby. Living the dream out there and back here, hang out with you for a little bit, see what Marco's up to, and get into some poetry.
I like it. So you're not a big poetry person in general, though, right?
Correct. I don't get much poetry in my daily dose.
Yeah?
No.
Who turned you on to poetry?
That would have to be this guy right here.
What? Today we're going to talk about business is business. Now, you and I met, and this is your second time on the podcast, but you and I met at University of Colorado, Denver, is where I was.
Right.
You were at a shittier college. I'm just kidding. You're at the other college for the poor people. I like to be very divisive and piss everybody off right at the beginning so you want to walk away and nobody wants to listen ever again. That's the idea. Now, you were at Metro.
Right.
And how did we actually meet? By the way, I'm endorsing, if anybody from Lind Excellence, Coco, would like to endorse the Poems for People Who Hate Poetry podcast, please hit us up, because I like the 78% of Coco Dark Chocolate from Lind Excellence.
Sponsors welcome, huh?
Sponsors welcome.
All right.
That's my piece. All right, so Sean and I have been friends for a long time.
Yeah, I think
friends
it was...
is a heavy word, but we've known each other for a long time.
I think I posted some recruitment looking for writers to come in and help out with the student newspaper project. And you were probably one of the first ones that arrived for it. And then we just,
I hear writing, I come running.
Yeah, we hit it off from there.
Hit it off is a pretty strong word, but yeah. Glad to have you all the way from China, though.
Thank you.
No, but we've been in a Mastermind for 4 years. Right? 4 years?
That sounds right.
Somewhere in that long time. And you love business. I love business.
Business is good. What can I say?
Business is good. Why is business good for you, do you think?
I would say that, as an example, one of my favorite companies, Whole Foods, now belonging to Amazon, brought me everything I could want for my stomach, for my conscience, for thinking that they are doing good things with their products. And I thought the only way this could come about is through the mechanisms of business. You get the things you need, the things you want, and all it is a value exchange between you and that company. No harm in that. In fact, a lot of good is created.
But everybody hates business.
It's a strange thing, right?
I used to think that was a silly thing that like Ayn Rand said. That wasn't true. Like, I didn't feel like everybody really hated business, but as I get older...
They sure do.
People really don't like
They
business.
really don't like business.
Like, even if they use it or love it, like, use a lot of the stuff, they're like, you know, what was that? Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah.
So they never don't like financiers. Mm-hmm. But, you know, they're trying to tear down Amazon now.
Yeah, Amazon.
Everyone hates Walmart. It's like, Walmart? They provide really cheap products for people who normally wouldn't be able to afford that shit. What are you talking about? That's crazy to me.
Yeah.
But anyway.
A strange dichotomy that everything we need and the source that provides it somehow becomes the scapegoat.
Yeah.
You know, in a way that we all have to shake a stick at.
Yep.
And, you know,
shake a stick at those moments.
And the simple solution is you just don't shop at Walmart anymore if you don't appreciate their model.
Yeah.
You don't order from Amazon if you think that they are somehow incongruent with your preference for retail. Then you shop elsewhere. And you actually have a lot of direct control over it, but instead most people take to complaining and are seeking others to fix the problem. Usually that is the expectation that government would somehow get involved to, you know, reprimand the businesses, to punish them and to make them change course.
Speak softly and carry a big stick.
Shake that stick, baby.
That was Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah.
He was the first person who did that.
Mm-hmm.
Who really used the antitrust laws to scare the shit out of everybody. So we're going to talk about Business is Business by Berton Braley. Great little series of poems. I don't know if you know this, but Berton Braley was actually he was called the Kipling of America in the early 1900s. And he wrote for a lot of newspapers. And the interesting thing is that it was all this stuff is very pro-business. And he was a popular poet. So it's like a totally different world than we live in today, where you don't have popular poets. The poets are these weird academic slingers of crappy verse. It's not even verse, like random vibrations of their throat that doesn't harmonize into logical, cohesive words. But Berton Braley had, I wouldn't call him like a deep poet, but he had some nice sounding verse, and that's it. Would you share it?
Yeah.
All right.
We're going to share it out there.
A lot of people
live.
Look at all the people watching. It's okay. We got a lot of people listening on the podcast. That's where it's all at.
Yeah.
So now the normal format for this is I read the poem ahead of time, but for the live audience, I'm actually going to read this too. So before I do, did you have any like preliminary thoughts of reading this poem? Business is Business. By the way, I don't know if you can Google this or not, but try it out. See if you can Google Business is Business by Berton Braley to see if you can follow along with us. But
I think we can get into the poem and then come back and open it up. Yeah, it's a very short poem, very to the point.
To the
Take
point.
it away.
All right. Okay, so business is business, the little man said. A battle where everything goes. Where the only gospel is get ahead. And never spare friends or foes. Slay or be slain is the slogan cold. You must struggle and slash and tear. For business is business, a fight for gold, where all that you do is fair. Business is business, the big man said, a battle to make of earth a place to yield us more wine and bread, more pleasure and joy and mirth. There are still some bandits and buccaneers who are jingle-bred beasts of trade. I like that. But their number dwindles with passing years, and dead is the code they made. Business is business, the big man said, but it's something that's more, far more. For it makes sweet gardens of deserts dead, and cities it builds now roar. Where once the deer and the gray wolf ran, from the pioneer's swift advance. Business is magic that toils for man. Business is true romance. And those who make it a ruthless fight have only themselves to blame if they feel no whit of the keen delight in playing the bigger game. The game that calls on the heart and head, the best of man's strength and nerve. Business is business, the big man said, and that business is to serve. Ooh. That's it. Very short little poem. Is this yours?
That's for you.
That's for me.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
All right. I need a piece of... I didn't even finish that one.
Extra.
Not even paying attention. All right, so that's a cute little short poem.
Very cute. Well read.
Cute.
It was a good voice that you project your poetry in. I think that you have a certain knack for it. So
Yeah.
I'm sure the podcast's followers are enjoying that reading as well.
What I find funny is if there's poetry that's read online, and so you can Google like famous poems like If, and you can hear them read by famous people. And a lot of times I've noticed that when people read poetry, like famous people, and they're really good at it, they don't. Their inflections and like how they emphasize words are so subtle. Like it's so subtle, you feel it a little bit, but you don't really experience it like as a slap to the face. The way I do it is more like a slap to the face, I think. And I don't know, it's something I need to work on in general. But I do enjoy reading poetry, and I believe it needs to be read out loud. But let's have a converse with verse with this thing. So in the first stanza, he says, "Business is business," the little man said. A battle. So he's talking about a battle where everything goes, where the only gospel is get ahead and never spare friends or foes. Slay or be slain is the slogan cold. You must struggle and slash and tear. For business is business, a fight for gold, where all that you do is fair. Where all that you do is fair. What do you think is going on in that first stanza?
Yeah, that goes right back to where we kicked off the podcast just now, that everyone hates business, and this is exactly that view. You know, and they're...
Go ahead. I'm listening.
On for the chocolate. All right. 2-second rule.
10-second rule.
So the view is just that anyone engaged in business is out for one thing, that's profit.
Yeah.
And they're going to go for that profit at the expense of all else, whether that is struggle and slash and tear. But anyways, it's all fair, because business is business. It's a fight for gold. You have to get ahead. You never spare friends or foes.
Well, what do you think of the fact that it says the little man said?
It's pretty clear that the poet is...
I like that. It's very clear.
Yeah, he has a view. You know, he wants the reader to know the view, maybe even influence their view a little bit. Of course, easy for us to agree with it. Perhaps people today reading this will find that a bit offensive to call, or they may side with the little man and say, "See, the little man is always held down by, you know, the big business."
Because they called him a little man.
Yeah,
Is that what you mean?
yeah. Mm.
Well, who is the? Oh my God! All right. Anyway, so this was recording, but this wasn't recording. All right.
Where does that leave us?
That leaves us. Actually, that's perfect.
Really?
Because I can read this ahead of time.
Oh.
So, podcast listeners, I'm still getting the setup right. I pressed record on the live, Facebook Live, but I didn't press record on the friggin' recorder. So, it wasn't recording the audio that Sean Doherty, my friend who just came from China, to have a discussion about Business is Business by Berton Braley. Didn't record any of that. But I can read this ahead of time and add it into the podcast later. So that's perfect, actually.
Okay.
So now we can go into the stanza. We're talking about the first stanza, everybody on the podcast land. And we're talking about Business is Business, the little man said, a battle where everything goes. So the idea is that everything goes with business is what most people are thinking. But, so who is that guy you were talking about who you shared to me that you hated, and what he's trying to do? You hate him. You're not going to use that language.
Yeah, no, I don't use that language. I think he's an intelligent man. He's a professor now, Scott Galloway, and he's also run successful businesses and run businesses that weren't as successful, but he takes a very hardline view against the big tech companies in the U.S. today, namely Amazon, Apple, Google, and Facebook.
Yeah.
And for these, he has some serious warnings to address in his book to let the American public know that these companies, in his words, I think paraphrasing here, he says, everyone thinks they know how they got to where they are, but everyone is wrong. So he wants to give us the full view of how these companies basically have, you know...
How did they get where they were?
With their struggle, their slash and their tear. Maybe the most insidious example he cites is with Google. He says that Google went out and talked to different media companies, say like the Washington Post or one from Denver, Rocky Mountain News, and then that one obviously went under. For Colorado listeners, you'll know that one. New York Times, any of these news media organizations, and Google would offer to make their content more accessible on the web as a free service to those media organizations. And
is that true?
Yeah. So then, they wanted to make the content searchable.
Yeah.
So they need to put their bots on the site, which then allows people searching for different topics to have the Google results generate that website as a result.
Okay. Sounds legit.
Sounds legit. And it's probably why the Google service works so wonderfully, because they're on just about every site out there. In his view, this was very insidious because they would get this for free access to the content, and then Google could monetize that content, whereas the newspapers themselves would make very little off those kind of ad revenues from Google developing from Google monetizing the search result.
Got it.
So he suggested that instead the media
happening.
companies should have been charging Google for access to the content from the very beginning. And
Seems like a fuck up on their part.
well, yeah, we could say that, sure.
So that's his argument? Does he have anything else as an argument for...
This is a big one with Google. He also says, both Google and Facebook are purveyors of fake news, but they refuse to be called themselves a media company. So he dislikes that they don't take some kind of responsibility for being in the media business. But I'm sure when people think of fake news, they think of news media organizations, not social media networks, not search engines. So I think that's a bit of a stretch.
Well, to be fair, media is changing.
Right.
Quite a bit, right? So Facebook, for instance, has changed their algorithm recently to sort of reflect that. And they're trying to downgrade certain news media organizations on their website, on Facebook, because they want it to be centered around families. Like family photos, they want that to be higher up in the, what you see on your feed versus Huffington Post or BuzzFeed or when Gawker was around, they were big. So they're trying to they're trying to change that, and they are recognizing that they're a media company right now. But what this guy seems to be saying is something like, hey, we... I should do this.
There you go.
They're thinking like, hey, you are a news organization. Google's a news organization, even though you're not saying you're a news organization. Which I definitely don't agree with that. But I understand what he's saying. Right? Like he's trying to say that they are now purveyors. Like people get the news by Googling it.
Right.
Like what happened in the Florida shooting. That's the idea.
Yeah.
Right? And so you Google that. You say, Google, what happened in the Florida shooting? Or Google, tell me the news today. And then Google chooses the news stations, to show you. So the question is, how do they show you? So he's correct about that to some degree. Is their algorithm selects, and they can control the algorithm.
Yeah.
So that's kind of important. Right? So he has that true, I think. But what's his issue with that again?
I think his comments are probably happening before Facebook changed the algorithm and their way to now favor more the family approach, as you explained. So before that, he thought both companies were very standoffish, and they would say adamantly, we're not media companies, we're a social media company, or we're a social network, or we're a search company, but they were refusing that title. And he thinks that in some ways, Google is taking advantage as the gatekeeper of information, where a news agency won't, while they're generating the content, if it's not searchable in the same way that Google has control over search, they're losing out on the money. So they're producing all this content, but people won't buy the newspaper. When they Google it, they may go directly to the site and find it that way, but Google will now charge you, if it's a pay-per-click model, to access the content that they first got for free.
So I'm not following the argument that Scott Galloway had against Google and Amazon. Can you help me understand?
Well, okay, Amazon's a different story,
sorry,
too.
It's Google and Facebook. Cool.
Yeah.
Let's stay on the news media stuff.
Yeah.
So the idea that we're talking about business is business, and we have a little man, Scott Galloway. He's an evil son of a bitch. I'm just kidding. No, he's just a guy that talks about how Amazon, Facebook, and Google had used organizations like Rocky Mountain News and other news organizations, news companies, newspapers. They got their content for free in order to give access to the world so that people could search it. And, like if I wanted to Google an article in Rocky Mountain News, I could Google it. But Rocky Mountain News didn't get paid anything from that. So what is the argument? I don't understand the argument here, though.
Well, so
that's just a statement of fact.
Yeah, he positioned this part at one point in the book because he was on the board for a major news agency. And he suggested to them to basically charge Google for this access, if I remember correct, to not allow Google to access the site for free, to not crawl the site for free, and to protect their content in a way. The same way we have to pay to read the newspaper. I think his position was Google was getting access to the sites for free. They should have been charging for that. So this is more his business strategy discussion.
Yeah, I don't see the argument.
Ultimately, they didn't accept his strategy, obviously.
Well, the reason they didn't is because there's competition in the news world. If they didn't do it, someone else would have, and that company would have risen to the top in terms of ranking, right? So they wanted to be a part of the rise, and so they did something about it.
Yeah.
Maybe they were wrong in how they positioned themselves, or maybe they didn't monetize properly. But what is his argument? Do you know his argument against?
Well, sometimes I feel like it's less of an argument, and sometimes it's more of a complaint. So he doesn't like that they went through it this way, and he says, this is everyone now holds Google in very high regard for providing all this information. When you have a question, Google tells you. But he says the way that they got to that position basically cut the revenues of all these news organizations by accessing it for free. But again, this is Google's strategy. The news organizations would have failed to recognize it as a threat. They didn't respond in some way.
Thing. So it's like, that the automobile cut the revenues of the horse and buggy industry.
Exactly.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
And maybe they used it by saying we're gonna, use your roads to begin with. And they're like, okay, well, if you want to use the roads, just like anybody else, all right. I mean, it's not a great analogy, but that's the general idea, though, is it just seems like the reason they accepted the deal, it's the same thing with, like, iTunes is a better example. Like, Steve Jobs convinced all these music labels to give away their music for 99 cents, or to sell it for 99 cents rather than do albums. But it took a while because they wanted to be on the album model. The problem was that they were getting attacked from outside by organizations like Napster.
Yeah.
And the interests of people were changing. More people, more kids like me, we wanted individual songs. I didn't want to buy a whole fucking album if I wasn't going to listen to all of them. And it got to the point where most of the albums sucked. Or most of the songs on the album sucked. There was like one or two hit songs. And that even destroyed music, but the labels didn't care. They just wanted to put out an album, so they put out 15 shitty songs and 2 good ones, right? And Steve Jobs came around and said, we're going to charge 99 cents a model. And I don't remember how he did it, but he was very good about it. But he did the same kind of thing. He offered, this quid pro quo deal to them, and they took it. And he convinced the right people. He knew he had to get like Sony to say yes, and then this organization would say yes. If he got this artist, he would be good, and then he would be able to move, to that artist, and then that would bring more people. Right? That was the general idea. Yeah. So it seems like Scott Galloway, who's this little man, where he thinks that a battle where everything goes. That's kind of his. He feels like business is a battle where everything goes, which is what Berton Braley is saying in this poem. Business is business, where the only goal is get ahead. So the idea is that it's like this dog-eat-dog. That's what Scott Galloway is under that impression. It's a dog-eat-dog world.
Right.
The business owners of this organization said, of the Rocky Mountain News, for instance, and Google wanted to take advantage of that small organization who was trying to get more money. And so they took advantage of that by saying, we'll give you the content. Yeah. And that's what... So Scott Galloway is a perfect example of that little man.
Yeah. What he did. And he says, sometimes he can just be rather bombastic in his writing, and I don't think his claims can really be supported, because he calls to question the very mission statement of Google, which is to organize the world's information.
Yeah.
And he also points out that the founders are quite likable and charming foreigners, and so it's easy for people to cheer them on and want their success. But at the same time, they're doing this dark and nefarious thing by accessing all the web information and then making money off of it on their own while the media companies are struggling.
Yeah.
So this is a very nice plot for some kind of storybook, I suppose. But when you actually look through the facts and you understand it the way you put it, comparing it to how Apple did the same thing with iTunes, and you say, okay, this was a business decision, a business strategy, and everyone was on board with that strategy.
Well, but it doesn't say, it just doesn't, from how you're conveying it, to be honest, it doesn't sound like he's quite making an argument yet. Like, it just sounds like he's saying, like, complaints. Now, I imagine he's making an argument. I saw a little bit of his TED Talk, but it was very inane and boring, so I didn't stick around. But he was basically just saying something along the lines like, you know, each of these mega corporations are accessing some components of your intestines for Amazon, your brain for Google, your heart for Facebook, right?
Yeah.
Just like so you're saying that type of thing wasn't used before? Like, what the fuck? Like ABC tapped your heart, and you know, AMP tapped your stomach. Like, fuck out of here! Like, that's such a stupid. So from Scott Galloway just seemed like an old curmudgeon who's just pissed off that these whippersnappers beat the shit out of his lazy ass. And it's like, to me, this new era of news is actually a good thing for news writers. Because now you have to prove yourself actually worthwhile. Like, in the past, you could just suck up and you could sleep your way to the top, for instance. Which, you know, the Me Too movement with Brett Weinstein, right? Harvey Weinstein, sorry, Brett. Harvey Weinstein. Brett Weinstein, I think, is a biologist, actually.
Okay.
He was on Dave Rubin a lot. But, who I don't know personally.
Okay.
Yeah, so, like, that model is the common model. Right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, you had these rich old fat white guys who had all the power in the past, and you had to go through them, and a lot of times if you're a woman, for instance, you had to sleep with them to get a job. I think that's an exaggeration. I don't think it's fair. But, you know, in the past, like, if you wanted to be a writer for Rocky Mountain News, like, if you wanted to be a newspaper writer, you had a very limited ability to do that. Now you can just start a blog thanks to Google.
Yeah.
Now, there's different problems. There's different difficulties with that, of course. Like, you have a lot of more voices to compete with, which means, guess what? You have to actually be good.
Right.
In the past, you could pass without being good. You just had to be a good suck-up, for instance.
Yeah. No, I think that's really fair. And when he finally does come to making an argument, I guess his points, he makes recommendations, he makes suggestions about what he thinks these companies should do. But in the end, I feel it's really not so much him arguing about what they've done, just complaining about it, perhaps. He's an old blowhard, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the little man argument, though, is he believes, just like a lot of people believe, that in capitalism in general is about, there's a battle, it's a dog-eat-dog world.
Right.
And that's how they think of it. They think of it as Walmart comes in, the small business owner dies.
Correct. That's the standard view.
That's the standard view. Where the only gospel is get ahead, which means that they don't care about their business compatriots. Like the argument there is that Barnes & Noble doesn't care about the people buying their books. They don't care. They just want to get ahead. So they don't care what they do as long as they get ahead.
Yeah.
That's the idea behind Barnes & Noble. They're a mega corporation. Netflix doesn't give a shit about you. They just want to get ahead. That's according to this philosophy of the little man. Slay or be slain is the slogan called. You must struggle and slash and tear. For business is business, a fight for gold, where all that you do is fair. So there are no rules in this business.
Correct.
All right. Now you chose this poem. Why did you choose this poem? Or no, I sent it to you. You liked it.
Yeah.
Why did you choose the topic?
I think it's really just, knowing both how we feel and the appreciation we have for business and what it creates for us today. I just find it so perplexing that everyone holds this little man view, that they would somehow think that really these businesses that deliver the necessities of life to us every day are only struggling for profit and nothing else. And they have no Or that, okay, by that same token, actually the fact that they are struggling for profit and the profit motive has driven them to produce this service or product is why we are able to receive it in the first place, which is in fact then a very good thing.
Okay, so great.
And like just on my flight over here, coming from Hong Kong to San Francisco, and I typically fly United. Every time I'm wondering and slightly worried that I might get dragged off the plane.
What?
From that story maybe 2 years ago when a passenger got pulled off the plane quite physically.
Wasn't he being an asshole?
Yeah, there's different views about it, but of course,
but wasn't he being a belligerent asshole?
Of course, this feeds into the little man view that they would say, businesses don't care about their customers, so they drag them off. Now, I don't really think I'll get dragged off the plane, but that, as a traveler, is on my mind.
Dragged off, though? I forgot.
They needed to give his seat, I believe, to some pilots who would be taking the next flight after that airport. So that those pilots had to be in the next city to get on the plane that they needed to.
Is that all there was to it, though?
Well, actually...
I'm trying to remember what happened in that story. I remember reading about it where they dragged him off, which to me was ridiculous. Just on my opinion, fuck you. If I don't, this is it's such a weird cultural thing where I don't think people respect private property anymore.
Exactly.
Because, it's their property, so if they don't want you to be on it, you have to leave. And that seems pretty cut and dry to me. Now, should they have done it from, a business standpoint? No.
Yeah.
That was stupid business because there's all this PR that was a negative backlash that was not worth one incident with your people being late. But then they get punished in the stock market because their stocks crashed.
Yeah.
Which is the whole point of stock markets and a free market economy is we get to decide how you should be acting.
Yeah.
And if you don't act that way, then someone else will act, and you'll get. Southwest would never do that. In a million years. We all know that. We all know Southwest would, try to give him a free flight. They would, and if he didn't, they'd say, all right, well, I can't imagine with the principles and foundation of Southwest that they would do that to that gentleman or that crazy fucker.
I think at that time, I'm pretty sure it was you. You posted something on Facebook, a post by Mike Rowe from Dirty Jobs, where he took a really good position on the whole incident, and he was saying, obviously from customer service point of view, they didn't do the right thing, and that's not a good way to treat another human being. But then the fact that the United CEO came out and made a big public apology was super dangerous for United and for air travel. I remember that, because he said, what they should have come out and said is that you need to understand, as a passenger on my airplane, you follow the rules. We set these for your safety. We set these for the safety of our other passengers. Yeah. And if we let you get away with anything, then who's going to feel safe on these planes anymore?
Yeah.
But they apologized, so now it is kind of like a free license to do whatever you want on the plane.
Sets the wrong precedent.
Sets the wrong precedent.
Travel in general. That's a good point. I remember he said that.
Yeah.
I like Mike Rowe.
He's a clear thinker.
He's a pretty clear thinker. I like him. Yeah, but that's the idea of business is business. It's what people see. One, people are not often on Facebook and in general, and writers too. It seems like people are not very contextual thinkers. Because, you've seen those flight patterns, the beauty harmonious flights of the hundreds of flights at night, right?
Yeah.
12 a.m. and you have hundreds of flights crisscrossing and no one's getting in accidents. And so we have one issue, and oh my God. I was but we fly millions of people across the fucking world every year. And you have one thing and you're getting pissed off because United was an asshole?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And
even if they were an asshole, it's crazy that people took it that way. And that's because the thing is, there's a narrative that business is slay or be slain. It's where all that you do is fair. That's what people believe about business. All that you do is fair, just like the poem says.
Exactly. And then again on the United flight just today, I felt that United was doing something that for them is making sweet gardens of deserts dead. They were on the side from the big man point of view. They had renovated the interior cabin of the airplane, which was quite nice. I actually stopped as I got on the plane and had a moment of sort of awe that they had done this to their plane. I didn't expect it from United, being an older company, and my perception of them being very tight with their cash.
Yep.
For some reason, they decided this was the right investment to make, and I commented to the staff, oh, this is a beautiful airplane now. Oh, do you like it? It's quite new. But even in that moment when they chose to invest, they have the big man attitude of doing something better for the customer experience. The staff still commented to me that United's squeezing their hours and they make them work 3 days when they used to have 4 days on turnaround. Sure, just one employee. But that, in the same context, that attitude of the little man is still very prevalent. As she's sitting inside the airplane where they've just invested money to improve the airline, she doesn't think that they are doing the right thing by business.
She's not a contextual thinker.
Yeah.
I mean, most people are just interested in their own lives, which is fair.
Mm-hmm.
It's not unfair to think that.
So I guess that's
but I see what you're saying. Like, she is saying, hey, I don't care that they spent this money to, they're spending all this money for their customers. They're not spending money on me, essentially is what she said.
Yeah.
So they are penny pinchers from her perspective, for the most part.
And then that would be probably why I chose this poem, that I want to find a way to let people become more contextual in their thinking.
Yes.
And maybe you have some thoughts about how poetry can do that more effectively than I can, but that's a goal.
One way is through the history of stuff like this, right? So literature often gives you perspective. That's the simplest cliche you hear about literature and broadly, is that you can't really understand Russia if you don't read the great Russian novelists. Like, you could travel there and you could see the results of the culture from the 19th century, but you'll never understand it if you don't read the 19th century novelists, the Dostoevskys and the Tolstoys and such, right? And it's the same of any culture. I mean, if you go to Britain, you can't really understand Britain and the British until you read their literature.
Certainly can't understand it from British comedy shows.
That too. Yeah. Well, because that's the result.
Yeah.
That's the most recent iteration on hundreds of years of literature, from Beowulf on down, and even farther before that. So the literature is like the popular literature, the famous Beowulf, the Crime and Punishment Dostoevsky, Wuthering Heights, right? Those, like the big novels of a culture, really help you understand the deep values, because especially if they're famous and popular in their own time, or in a time around, around that era, because that's what people believed on some level. Like a good writer represents the culture at large. That's what they do really well. Okay, so let's talk about the second stanza real quick. So business is business, the big man said, a battle to make of earth, a place to yield us more wine and bread, more pleasure and joy and mirth. There are still some bandits and buccaneers who are jingle-bred beasts of trade. But their number dwindles with passing years, and dead is the code they made. So what do you think that's about? Business is business. I mean, this is the big man talking now. So this is a guy who's more pro-business, because he's the big man, the roller of big cigars, if you guys know that reference, which you may not. Business is business, the big man said. So a battle to make of earth. So what do you think that means? It's a different kind of battle, because they both talk about battle. A battle where everything goes, is the little man says. Now this one says a battle to make of earth, a place to yield us more wine and bread. You and I talked about this in the car from the airport, actually. Remember?
I think it's here about, maximizing the resources, what we have, taking something, homesteading it. That's the word we were thinking of.
Homesteading
it, to turn it into something that wasn't there before.
What is homestead?
Homestead is the idea that if you discover a piece of property, land in most cases for homesteading, or if we talk about the moon, for example, and you mix your labor with the land, then you become the owner of it.
Yeah.
And
so who owns the moon?
Then it would be the U.S.
The
for
US
mixing their labor by, I guess all we did was place the flag there and take some samples.
So I don't think we own it, but I think we have a right to start cultivating if we get there first. But that's the idea of homestead, is that the government doesn't own the moon at this point. But if Elon Musk made it to the moon and started drilling, well, he would own that part of the moon. He would own some section. Yeah. Right? Because he cultivated, he used it properly. I agree. So that's what he's saying here is a battle to make of earth a place to yield us more wine and bread, more pleasure and joy and mirth. So the idea of business is to create values, iPhones, oil, hydroelectric dams, airplanes.
Whole Foods pizza.
Whole Foods pizza. Is that better than normal pizza?
It's fantastic pizza.
Is it healthy?
It's a lot
of
it's still
carbs
pizza, but
yeah, okay, it's still pizza. Well, I didn't know if it's like whole pizza. So it's like
I think it is whole grain, organic ingredients, but at the end of the day, you still eat pizza. Carbs are carbs. Yeah.
There's only so many carbs you can avoid.
Yeah.
Cauliflower has carbs.
I did not know that.
I think it has.
I'll take your word for it. Yeah,
that's true.
Okay.
And I obviously know very little about nutrition. Okay. So, in the second stanza, he's saying there are still some bandits and buccaneers. So there are Bernie Madoffs. There are bad people.
Bernie Sanders. Yep.
Bernie Sanders. Well, Bernie Sanders is the little man.
Yeah.
He's not the big man. And he's not a buccaneer. I guess he is a buccaneer now, because what did his wife do? Do you know his wife?
No.
They did something with, they bankrupted some college.
I know that he's got some pretty big homes around the U.S. So.
Well, but he also invested in universities or colleges or something.
Okay, yeah.
So he bankrupted some of them somehow by mismanaging their money.
Okay.
Now they got pissed.
Yeah. So that's why he wants free education for
everybody. Yeah. Okay, so that's the... what do you think he meant by... There are still some bandits... I think I know what he means here. There are still some bandits and buccaneers who are jingle-bred beasts of trade. Jingle-bred beasts of trade.
Yeah,
it's a great line.
A really great line and colorful description of those bandits and buccaneers. It's unavoidable that there's always going to be these fly-by-night bandits, someone looking to take advantage of others.
What about the jingle-bred?
The jingle-bred. They are... Oh, no.
B-R-E-D.
Jungle-bred. They are jungle-bred, in fact. So wildlings.
I thought jingle... That's so funny.
Yeah, it sounds better, jingle bread.
I think you should change it to jingle bread.
Most likely.
Because jingle bread, I thought it meant bread to make these fake little jingles.
Ah, okay.
But I guess he couldn't say that because he's a creator of jingles himself. He probably doesn't want to say that. So he's jungle bread. So he's saying they're basically beasts.
Beasts, yeah.
See, that's not as profound.
Yeah. No.
So I like Berton Braley a lot just because he's pleasant to hear a little bit. And he has a pro-business standpoint, but he's definitely not the deepest of poets, for sure. But jungle-bred beasts of prey. So they're born in the jungle. They're beasts. They're animals. They're not civilized. And this is from the big man is saying this.
Yeah.
The big man is the big man. And he's saying, but their numbers dwindle with passing years, and dead is the code they made. I don't know if that's true because it's been about 100 years since he wrote that. But I can imagine that there are less snake oil salesmen now than then.
They take different forms. You can squash them in one area, then they pop up in another. I don't know that they will ever dwindle to be so unaccountable, but I think in this fast-moving age that we're in, it's easier to recognize them, protect against them because of the technologies that we so enjoy from Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, these companies that in a way make commerce a lot safer. And in a way, maybe China is a great example. You have plenty of knockoff brands there that are fake Apple stores. And, you know, you can walk in and
It's
buy
working on their own
a
stuff.
fake Apple product and not know till later that it's really not the same quality. But because of resources on the internet, you can probably first verify that location to some extent and then find out, wait a minute, the real Apple store is down the street, and all you needed was connectivity and a phone to make that judgment call or to check the record.
I do think that's a little different.
Yeah.
Because part of it is that they don't have a respect for private property in the same way that America does. Like America would take your ass to court in a heartbeat if you did that.
Yeah.
And I think one of the big failings of American government is that they're not protecting Apple products. Like they should say to China, stop doing that. Like you can't do that because you're taking away profits from Apple. So they should say, if you're not going to make it legal, then we're going to put tariffs on you.
Yeah.
Like that's how you would deal with other governments. So I think that's kind of Chinese government being corrupt.
Well, I agree with that. They are missing that important piece of a free market society, which is protection of private property rights. It's getting better, and that may be from pressure from U.S. and European governments, but they have actually started to fine these fake knockoff companies and award favors and damages to the Western companies. So that's improving. But I mean, I think my point is still relevant in that another example, in China, they have the online equivalent of Amazon, and that company launched a verified business version called Tmall. And so if you want to buy the authentic property of Apple or of, you know, H&M clothing, for example, you go to Tmall and it will only be from that brand. It's not from anyone else. So this is their Amazon company called Alibaba protecting the brands who want to sell into China and are ensuring them that when you are on this Tmall platform, no one else can try to sell your goods. It is just you.
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Seems like that's a way that the government should just be doing that.
Yeah.
Like that's the job.
Are you whoa, Kirk? Are you calling for more government role in the economy? I mean, can private businesses
things that the government should do, such as protect individual property rights?
Yeah,
like that's the idea. That's all the government should be bloody well doing. Stop doing anything else. Stop building more tanks, which I'm pro-military, but we don't need more tanks. We need you to protect use the tanks you have to protect our property rights, including our branding and using our products and reverse engineering our products. So I think it's silly that companies have to kind of deal with this on their own without the government. I mean, there's a lot of parallels to stuff like that in our country too. Like our country fails a lot too, like freedom of speech, like the Charlie Hebdo case, and there's a lot of people who didn't want to draw Muhammad, right? And so one of the things they were afraid of, like their excuse was a good one, and I understood it, is that we didn't want to die. And the problem was that the American government wasn't willing to do anything to protect them, which would be to just decimate your enemies, right? So in that particular case, now in this case it's a little bit different. They should say, we're going to come in there and fine you, and if you don't stop, we'll send in the military or the police to shut you down because you're doing the wrong thing. That's the proper role of government.
Yeah.
Okay. Business is business, the big man said. So this is the third stanza. But it's something that's more, far more, for it makes sweet gardens of deserts dead, like Las Vegas. And cities it built now roar, where once the deer and the gray wolf ran from the pioneer's swift advance. Business is magic that toils for man. Business is true romance. Now, people think that that's a bad thing, what he just said there. About, it's more than business is business. It's making sweet gardens of deserts. But people say that that's encroaching on the land, for instance. That we're destroying pristine nature. Keep nature the way it is. And cities built now roar. That's a bad thing because, especially where once the deer and the gray wolf ran, I'm pretty sure there are environmentalists who build their whole organization around stopping cities from going where deer and gray wolves run. But he is praising that. So what do you feel?
Well, we are a species that lives indoors in structures, and
You live in a cave.
well, we're not. we won't live as long in the caves, perhaps.
Probably not.
So we should view it, on the one hand, as being a very good thing that businesses will go forth and find new areas for us to develop and to civilize. On the other hand, I don't think that there's cause for any reason to view business in this way as being something negative, because the same businesses that do create, yeah,
You can put your legs this way.
I like them stretched out here.
Okay. You look very awkward, very uncomfortable.
Just when I'm turning in here.
Okay.
Back to the point. So the same businesses that create these,
Deserts from dead land.
the cities it built now roar. They build us these roaring cities, but those same businesses are also the ones that are going to protect the deer and the gray wolf when they run, because businesses recognizing the value of nature can start nature conservations.
Okay.
They can start wildlife reserves, and then they run that as their business. It's a home for animals, a habitat for wildlife.
Yeah, but that's not nature. That's a zoo.
A zoo is the most common form that we know, but Colorado has something called the Wildlife Sanctuary, which is, I would say, the furthest thing from a zoo that people can still come and visit without going on a full safari.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there's different variations it can take, and it's done
But that's
by a
privately owned, you're saying?
privately owned, yeah.
I think a lot of people would still object to that. I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I'm fine with it, but I think a lot of people would object to that
Mm-hmm.
in general. Like the idea of owning animals on that mass level or something, I think puts people off in a weird way. Because I imagine even that seems like a government thing.
That's run by private donations. Yeah.
Yeah, but is it a... You sure it's private?
But
It's not the
what
same thing as,
I
like,
think
Walmart.
I think you'll understand here.
Is it
What they're
non-profit?
doing is mostly rescued wildlife. So they rescue
Okay.
the animals. They're taking. Apparently, there are a lot of people who actually keep big cats like tigers and lions as pets in their home. And
What?
as you can imagine, they're not well treated for and well nourished.
How do they not die?
And the people stay alive somehow. So this organization will be primarily rescuing these animals from a home environment.
Yeah.
And then they're not able to go back to the wild because it's a full-grown lion that grew up in captivity in a house, in an apartment building or something.
What?
And
in
then
an apartment building?
They have the strangest cases, like pulling leopards out of the back of a Jeep that somebody just like drove around town with 3 leopard pups in his Jeep or something. So
Pups is different.
Well, they're sometimes full grown too. I mean, next time you're in Colorado, and if I'm there, we'll go, but definitely you go and you see the stories, and this is why people can rally and support it, even though it's ownership of the animals, but they say, okay, they've rescued the animals, they're doing something good for them, so they jump on board with it.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's interesting. All right. So they own animals. That's my conclusion. But on a mass scale.
Uh-huh.
But so they're doing it in a very positive way. But most environmentalists, I think, would say something negative about all of this. They would, about the wolf and movie. What does it say? So
Wolf and deer.
and cities it built now roar, where once the deer and the gray wolf ran from the pioneer's swift advance. So one of the things I like about reading old stories and literature is you get to see the view of people back in the day. Mm-hmm. It's not what you always would expect. And in this case, he's definitely pro building cities. When I worked with Alex Epstein, he made a really good point about, we have smog and problems with pollution today, so we think. But it's nothing compared to like the early 19th century, when it was just, Industrial Revolution was really just beginning. And at that time, the people, when they were asked, should we keep going and accept this terrible smut and smog and fog and the pollution that's blackening everything all around us and the ash that comes down, should we accept that? And they said to get rid of that would be like to cut off a limb. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Because one of the things that they understood was what life was like before that, because they were of an age where, like, my grandfather lived when there were no industrial, right? When there were no factories.
Yeah.
And in that case, we all lived in the jungle, or we lived on the farm and backbreaking work from morning to night, and a lot of people died very young. That's not as much the case anymore.
Yeah.
But people often don't see that side of things, and so when they think about and cities that built now roar, where once the deer and the gray wolf ran from the pioneers' swift advance, they see that as a bad thing today.
Yeah.
Versus back then, they didn't see it negatively anymore.
Yeah. And I really like that line of thinking to say, you know, what was it before we had any of this?
Yeah.
Would we really be better without it? And if I can go back to our first topic, which was the tech companies, Google and whatnot, and, you know, Google last year was issued a fine by the European Union for $2.7 billion. And the reasoning for the fine, just as a short summary, is that Google has the clear market dominance for search. People can search for anything on Google, and when the results pops up, Google has been accused of manipulating the results to favor their other services on Google's search engine. They're connected companies that they own. It may be true, but at the same time, I think this is where the European Union needs to follow this line of thinking and look back and say, wait a minute, what did people do before Google allowed you to search for anything and get the answer right away? You had no access to that kind of information. You didn't have this feature, this knowledge power at your fingertips, literally.
What is the argument against that, though?
They want I guess their view is it should be completely unbiased. There should be no ranking system that somehow, I don't think they say there should be no ranking system, but that it shouldn't somehow unfairly favor Google for the fact that it is a Google service or connected.
Do you think there's no unfair advantage before Google? Like in traditional media, did they not favor certain things?
I think one of the lessons I learned at Metropolitan State University, a fine university, by the way, is...
no, Metropolitan State College.
It's been renamed.
Well, not when you went.
Correction, Metropolitan State College of Denver, recently renamed Metropolitan State University. We learned in, our very first...
There's now two universities on the same campus?
No, it's renamed, rebranded as MSU. There's no MSCD
But
anymore.
you were on the same campus as, like, it was Metro, University of Colorado, Denver, where I went to school.
Right, where we met.
CCD.
CCD. Yeah.
All on one big-ass campus.
And all three are there, but mine just has a more prominent name now.
I wonder what the difference is. Like, they just make that shit up? Like, we're just a university. So it's a university and college. Like, I'm not sure. Types of degrees you can get? I have no idea how that system works. Let's bring that fucker down. That is a bit, academia is academia, fight for gold, where all that you do is fair.
There you go.
Basically that's a beast of a place where nobody gives a shit about anything except their own dominance in the world.
I'm with you. I
hate academia. It's the whole point of this show.
Going back to it then is that we learned in our first journalism class that, everything has bias baked into it. That you choose to report on one topic means you are biased to that versus the 4 or 5 other topics your space could have been used for in the column. So you can't avoid it. Yeah, there's no way to avoid
and
it.
Preference are innate in everything we do.
Exactly. So
there was bias before Google had an algorithm for bias. They just don't like that it's not their own bias anymore.
Right.
It's Google's bias. It's a tech company, not a journalist company.
Yeah. And that was in another article. I thought I just couldn't square his point here. He says, this is now an article in the Washington Times by Victor Davis Hanson. He He is a professor in Stanford University, and he says that now computer users are discovering that social media and web searches seem highly controlled and manipulated by the whims of billionaires rather than federal regulators. But how would it be better to have federal regulators control, the search results from social media and web searches? I mean, why do we not trust the people who built the systems that give you everything you could ever ask for in terms of you ask a question, it gives you the answer right away. And Facebook with 2 billion users now? And they know how to connect people better than everyone. But now this guy from Stanford University suggests that federal regulators should be managing all of that, when they have to close down almost every year because of budget shortfalls.
That's a good point. That is a really complex, tricky argument that people make with that. I hear that all the time, and it seems to come down to they don't trust the system. So, for instance, they might trust a particular business person, but they feel like the ordinary person or the person who advocates that type of argument feels that you can't do anything about it if a business person wants to. So, you watch a lot of movies, and if the business person wants to destroy your neighborhood because they want to build a megaplex or some type of condominiums, there's nothing you could do about it, essentially. And that's the feeling people have, but somehow bureaucrats are better. Nobody talks about how, but bureaucrats are better somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So that I think, for at least for the left, and I think there's I think Thomas Sowell, the economist, had an interesting way of thinking about this, where people on the left like the communism, which communism is a leftist ideology. Like Nazism is a right ideology of the traditional right, generally speaking. But what you got with the communists was, and with any socialist on that level, with the leftist socialist, is that a manipulation of the people on like a micro level. So, like the North Korean cheerleaders. Like, the idea is how beautiful it is if every piece of this cog, which is a human, I can do whatever I want to make this beautiful tapestry. And left intellectuals, especially academic intellectuals, are very in line with that thinking, because they feel like they can apply their mind to it. And if I just tweak this, and if I manipulate that, and if I change this, then we can get the perfect system. And they feel that way about, these types of economic issues and what you were talking about, right? And that's what they want. It's not in terms of like socialism. And that's why they trust the bureaucrat and the government officials, because he's a part of that. So all I have to do is just write to my bureaucrat and tell him what to do. Or if I teach him the right methods, then we're good. But you can't do that with the capitalists, because there's especially in America, because there's an individualistic element to it. Which just Jeff Bezos, he's going to surprise you and buy Whole Foods out of nowhere. Or he's going to build drones. Or McDonald's is going to build automated checkout machines if you try to hike up the prices. So every time we try to tweak the economy to get the perfect outcome that we want, these goddamn capitalists change everything. So there's like a general mistrust of capitalists, like the billionaires. That's the real reason, I think, people don't trust it. I completely agree with that, and I think that's exactly the issue at hand. But do you think that some of the leftists are waking up to the kind of incongruity of this? Incongruous? I don't follow it close enough to know.
Because they see now Trump in charge, and they say, wait a minute, we don't want this person in charge. We don't trust him in charge. Well, like it's not our guy. Then we should maybe think about not giving the government so much power, because when he's in place. No. I can't. I mean, I don't know. I don't follow it closely enough, but I don't see how. Because what you're talking about is like a monkey in the wrench type thing, and like
or monkey in the wrench, a monkey in the wrench in the, what's the saying? Throwing a wrench in the gears, monkey in the gears.
I don't know this one.
You never heard of a wrench in the gears? Like throw a wrench in the gears and it jacks up the gears?
What's it have to do with the monkey?
Maybe there's no monkey involved. I had a lot of beer before this.
Here's one I want to know about.
But the point is, there was a point there, like throwing a wrench in the gears.
Yeah, throwing a monkey wrench in the gears.
Monkey wrench,
Okay,
that's what it was. Throwing a monkey wrench in the gears and jacking the whole system up. Yeah. That's what Trump kind of is.
Yeah.
And so their fear, your argument is that the left is having a fear of, well, we don't want that to happen anymore, right? We don't want a Trump to happen. We caused this. And we don't want to trust the government because the government is Trump.
It's clear, right?
That's what they're saying.
Yeah.
I think they're just saying we just need to get rid of Trump. They just hate Trump and anything he does.
Yeah.
So I think that's their answer to that. Not that, like they're saying that basically Trump hijacked the government, which is a noble thing that if we have control over it, we can tweak it properly. Mm-hmm. That's the idea that I think the left really represents and believes in.
Okay.
From what I can tell.
What do you think of Braley's words when he says business is true romance?
Yeah.
Yeah. How does that play out? What do you have any examples or thoughts?
Well, like
about?
when you start a business, it's like it's definitely a romance. Like you're in love with what you're doing. Like Steve Jobs starting Apple, he was in love with that product. There's a scene or a shot of him, a picture of him like when one of the old desktop Macs, like 2 or 3 years after he came back to Apple the second time in like 97, right? There's this picture of him licking the screen because he was just so in love with it. He just thought it was beautiful, so good to eat is what he thought of it, right? And that was like a serious love, is a romance for that type of thing. It's a romance that I think people don't appreciate about business people. And they don't understand that what they're doing is out of, especially the good ones, which I think is what this poem was talking about. So there's a lot of bad business people, but the thing is that they end up tearing themselves out. They fail anyway, eventually. Bad businesses always fail eventually. But good businesses like Amazon, they keep their eye on the prize, Jeff Bezos. It was Jeff Bezos who started that company, for God's sakes. 20 years ago, right? In the mid-90s, something like that, 97 or something. I don't remember. But mid-90s for sure. Started Amazon.com. What does it say?
1994.
I was close. 94. So it started in 94, and geez, that's so recent when you think about it. But he started that sucker, and it was nothing. Like he literally sent books himself when he got started. Like people would order the book and he would package it and send it. It's nuts to think about. God, that's so crazy. I don't even know where I was going with that anymore. It was just so crazy.
Yeah.
So for him, it was a romance.
Yeah.
And in the sense of he loved what he was doing. Right. And I think, I always think of Sam Walton, who died, or the story goes, I don't know if this is actually true anymore, but the story goes that he died and he had been working like the day before. He had been he was in his late 90s and he was still working. Wow. Because he loved what he did.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true, but that story, the idea of that is the romance part. It's there's just the love of it. Like when Steve Jobs got diagnosed with cancer, he'd said, I don't have a bucket list, I have a productive list, basically. And he had a list of all these products he wanted to create, the iPhone, the iPad, and things of that nature.
So I want to challenge this a little bit, because what I'm worried is that if this is the only way that business is embodied as true romance, then it sounds like it's only in the realm of the big man. And the little man would never feel that romance. So, of course, the little man won't understand this view that business is a good thing if they don't have a feel of that romance, because they're not the creator, they're not the founder, they're not the owner of the product. So they don't necessarily buy in with the same love or passion of Sam Walton or Steve Jobs. Is there then a way that the little man experiences true romance through business?
No, because that's what makes him a little man.
Yeah.
So the fact that you're a little man doesn't mean you're the owner. Mm-hmm. So the big man in the story isn't necessarily the owner. He's the person who has that view. So you could work at Zappos and love what you do, even though you're a customer service rep. And you could be a big man. So I think what he's saying with this poem is the little man he chooses to be little because of his thoughts. His thoughts are little thoughts. The thoughts of a little person, a weak person, a useless person who hates the world. The big man is a big person who thinks that the world is capable of being transformed based on his values, that he can do something even if he works at a company. A big man could work for another bigger man, for sure. You can still be a big man. But the idea is that, you have this ideology. I think that's the idea that Berton Braley is trying to get across. Like the last stanza, and those who make it a ruthless fight have only themselves to blame, if they feel no whit of the keen delight in playing the bigger game, the game that calls on the heart and head, the best of men's strength and nerve. Business is business, the big man said, and that business is to serve. So it's what he's saying is he who holds the philosophy that business is to serve, which is what a business does. Every business. There's no business that doesn't do that. That if you hold that, then you're a big man. But if you're a little man, then you're the one who thinks that business is dog eat dog, that it's, out to get the gold only. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. But I would hope that there's still some way that the little man does participate in the romance.
No, because it's a mentality.
It's
so
at this level.
You have to get out of the mentality.
At the individual level, the entrepreneur level, they have the big man mentality, and the little man does not. But then, if they feel somehow the systemic romance, it's a system of romance to me. That say, there's...
What's a system of romance?
There's 566,000 people at Amazon because of that one big man's vision. 566,000 employees. So wouldn't every one of them in some way feel that sort of magic in the romance because he created something?
That's what I'm saying.
That they are a part of.
I'm saying that.
They don't have the same view.
No, they do have the same view. To serve.
To serve, yeah.
You don't have to be the owner to have that view.
Yeah. Similarly,
so what are you saying?
I'll go to an Adam Smith quote. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. And this system, to me, is where the romance is, as much as it is in the entrepreneur's vision, but just the way that everyone working for themselves creates that environment of trade, and we get what we need. And that, to me, is a very romantic notion. Maybe not enough people recognize it, but if the little man took more of that into consideration, they could follow more in the big man's footsteps.
You're saying that if this is the way to become a big man.
Not everyone can be a big man.
So I still don't think you understand big man.
I know what we're saying for the little man and the big man as a mentality on the individual level.
Okay. But
what I want to know is, can the little man appreciate the business system and not hate business?
No, because you're not a little man anymore when you do that.
You become the big man.
You become a big man. It's like you could still be heavy set and have the mentality of losing weight. And you start taking the actions that follows your mentality. But first comes the mentality. You have to convince yourself to be nutritious and healthy and have the right mentality. Then the body will follow and you'll start losing weight and you'll get healthier and things of that nature. That makes sense?
Yeah. You
see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like by the nature of being a little man, that's not how it works. You're a little man. So that's it. You're just a little man. You're done. And you're a little man if you have that view. Once you start changing your view, then you're a big man. So when you stop changing your view from, I believe that business is business. Sure, it's a battle where everything goes. If you hold that view, you're a little man. Mm-hmm. If you believe, the business gospel is only to get ahead and never spare friends or foes. That's what those business people are about. They're just about destroying each other. Google goes out and destroys Rocky Mountain News. Ugh, the businessman. You're a little man. You can't be a big man. Period. That's what Braley's saying, I think. Slay or be slain. It's dog eat dog world.
Yep.
You have to struggle and slash and tear. That's the idea.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Fair enough.
Any last words? Or
well, I'll just say probably my favorite part, lines is
besides
that
the desert.
In playing the bigger game, the game that calls on the heart and head, the best of man's strength and nerve.
Yep.
I think that's absolutely right. We're so worried about, in our society, taking care of people and providing more of a safety net. But to me, the
universal
safety
basic
net,
income.
Yeah, and that actually restricts people. They don't have a chance to develop their strength and their nerve if they're always taken care of. Now, sometimes we do need a helping hand for sure. But, as a general principle, make your own way in the world.
Personal responsibility.
Personal responsibility.
That's the challenge.
Yeah.
How do you spread that throughout the culture of 350 million Americans?
Well, Scott Peterson's doing a good job with it, right? We talked about him earlier.
Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson. Sorry, Jordan.
That shit's straight, man. Jordan fucking Peterson.
Scott Galloway on the bad side. Jordan Peterson on the good side.
So put them together and got Scott Peterson.
I think I'd like to see that debate.
No, Jordan Peterson would destroy that.
I would love that.
Really? You really don't like Scott Galloway?
Just his claims, his unsubstantiated claims.
Definitely unsubstantiated.
One thing, he also says this. He says, 1 in 6 searches on Google have never been searched before in history. 1 in 6 questions on Google have never been asked before in history. How do you even prove that that's the case in all of history? Because his exact words have never been asked before in history. That may have never been asked before on Google, but Google is certainly not all of human history. So he points these things out.
I say that. I didn't understand what he was talking about.
It's quite strange, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I feel like you picked a pipsqueak.
Him or the quote?
No, him.
Well, he's got
he's got what?
He's got the TED Talk that's got a lot of views. His book, I don't know how popular that is, but it's sold on Amazon, which is funny that he opposes Amazon. And he's written a few big articles on the same thing.
Leftists who attack capitalism while in the air on their iPhones. It's like, fuck out of here, dude.
Yeah.
Can't do that shit.
I worry that more people will start to go to this cause that he's championing. And we really have, in my view, 4 companies that are stand-up, stellar companies providing a lot of value: Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple, and that are really, in many ways, on an equal scale in terms of influence as our own government, which is a tremendous incentive for the government to try to bring them down. But the more we can reinforce them, I think then inevitably it leads to greater opportunities of freedom and liberty and a return to capitalism. More for the big man. And when the big man wins, we all win.
Well, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with what you said before. I don't know how to measure the influence of the government, though. So, what do you mean by influence? So, yes, the big 4 companies have influence. Google, Facebook, Amazon. But I think there's such a different shift because before that, for instance, there was what was called the sexopoly, which was Viacom, GE, ABC, CBS. I don't remember all of them. Disney, Viacom, if I didn't say that. So these big mass media companies, they were huge, massive. Like GE was one of them. General Electric, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
But they owned like newspapers, TV stations, radio stations. I don't know if it's actually called Sexopoly. That was in a book I read.
Yeah. Sexopoly, an adult board game for couples or friends.
So it was.
If I search for Viacom, it'll probably come up too.
No, if you say the Big Six.
Big Six.
It's in this book. This is a book I read in college, The Big Picture by Ed.
Big Picture.
But if you talk about the Big Six media companies in the 90s, like they're falling apart to some degree.
Yeah.
But very interesting story about the Big Six, basically.
Okay. I'm definitely going to read that book.
Really?
Yeah. I want to know more about this and compare it to the Big Four now. That's on the
the Big
chopping
Six
block.
Still exists.
Right.
Still exists. So it's like now it's in competition. But see, this is what I'm saying about influence is, where is it?
Put it in my notes to read.
I'm trying to find where this is. Because it's in here somewhere.
Should we Google it?
Well, if you Google the Big Six, you'll see it. I don't know. I missed it. But anyway, so one of the differences is, let's say I wanted to do a podcast like what we're doing right now. I want to do a show to reach people. Right, like this, the movie Wayne's World was about this. Like they had a local show.
Right,
it was very hard for them to but even that cost money to do. Like even their show was complicated. This is less than $1,000 worth of equipment, and I'm able to reach as much as my talent can bring me and my marketing talent.
Well, it's fairly nice equipment too, and it's
That's what I'm saying. Under $1,000.
It's very good, very good, and your talent exceeds the value of this by triplicate.
Thank you, though. But no, like I have like very small figures in terms of the podcast download. Yeah. But the point is, in the past, I would have to go to a radio station and beg to get on the radio or try to work my way up, which is fine. You'd learn a lot, but then you may never get into it too. You may also get destroyed along the way, right? My point is that in terms of influence, it's the companies are the new companies, the Big Four, are really democratizing the whole thing. Sure. They're allowing from a ground up rather than an up-down model. So like Amazon allows you to sell your books, and they even help you print them too. They'll help you publish it and print it yourself. That's becoming more and more prominent. So now in the past, you had to hope for a big book deal. Now you could just write a book and publish it and try and market it yourself, right? In the past, you had to try to convince someone to let you do a TV station. Now you can put up a very inexpensive camera, iPhone, plug it in with a $30 piece of equipment called an iRig 2. Bing. Just kidding. And, plug it into a digital audio recorder, Zoom H6. Bing. No.
Enter product placement.
Yeah, none of that yet. But you do that, and you're good.
Yeah.
Now it's just about your building, if you have the business savvy to make it into something. That's the next thing. In the past, you didn't have to necessarily have that. You could structure it in a way that you could schism it out, like or demarcate it, or what's the word I'm looking for? Like basically, you could siphon or
distribute it.
That works too. Yeah. I'm trying to think of the best word, but basically the idea is you can specialize. Yeah. So you could specialize in being a radio host. Producer could specialize in being a producer. That still exists to some degree, but to another degree, you could do it all yourself. Like you could just sit in front of a like Jordan Peterson started. I mean, he was a professor, but on YouTube, he started by simply doing YouTube. Yeah. That's it. He just did YouTube videos of his lectures, and then he did a YouTube video of his own thought outside of his lectures, and then it grew from there. I mean, before Bill C-16, he had 1 million people already following him. Before he did the first famous thing in 2016, where everybody knows about it. The point is that that's a fundamentally different structure.
Sure.
And we're only at the beginning part of the wave. So it's only going to increase.
Yeah.
Like, as more old people die, I'm serious, and they stop watching fucking cable and CBS and like all the old six, people our age don't watch that stuff. I haven't had a TV in a decade.
Yeah.
I've watched everything on a laptop. And even the kids who do, the TVs are set up today now, and they're becoming more prevalent, where you can connect your phone and just, boom, play YouTube. And that's more and more common. And that's what's coming down. I mean, I heard something that was both exciting and scary. I didn't think about it this way, but the under 35 crowds, you know, what we call millennials generally, haven't really been in charge of anything yet. Right? We're still like 25 to 35 years old.
Yeah.
So we're not in charge of anything yet, really. We're not in charge of government. There's not a millennial president. Right? We're like 15 years away from that, or at least around there, right? You know, there's not that many CEOs of major corporations that are millennials. Like, there's not a lot of big media conglomerates that are millennial owned and operated.
Well, we do have one.
Zuckerberg.
Yes. Which we can count as a media conglomerate.
Yeah.
Top company, and in some ways a political entity that challenges the government.
And that's the first
for influence.
wave.
Yeah.
In one industry, tech,
Yeah.
Amazon, and Facebook, or particularly Facebook, because it's a little younger.
Yeah. Well, and then to your point again, I mean, Galloway completely misses this, the relevance of how the media is democratized and more people have access to it and what that does for opportunity. Because he is very, very concerned that Google, with the amount of earnings they have and the market capitalization, only has 15,000 employees. He compares it to Disney in Disney's heyday, and Disney had significantly more number of employees at that time. And he says, you know, Google is hoarding all this cash and they don't even share it with a lot of employees. But, you know, the Disney model was basically siloed in the towers that Disney owned and in Disney outlets or wherever else. You know, I bet most people listening to this would be hard-pressed to name somebody who they know who works at Disney. Yeah. And nobody made money off of Disney unless they were an employee there, per se. But with Google, every one of us probably knows someone who is working as a freelancer for Google ad campaigns, or he's an SEO wizard and he makes money on doing that, or he's somehow doing Facebook targeted ads. So people are making their living off of these technologies. They have an Amazon shop that they don't work directly for the company, but they make a living all the same. And you couldn't put that in the same context for any company until this day of sort of democratization of media.
Yes.
You know, you could get a job with Walmart before. If you didn't make money by just relying on Walmart, but you can with Google.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's fundamentally different. And like Amazon is, like, these are all platforms.
Yeah.
Like Apple's a platform for you to grow. Disney was a place where they created content. You know, Apple provided tools for you to create content. Yep. And, you know, Steve Jobs' analogy was that a computer and a laptop was like a bicycle for the mind. It was a tool to use for your mind. And that's what he was trying to create. Disney was, you know, and Viacom and all, and any other major corporation before that was not trying to build products for you to go out and make money with it. They just wanted to build a product to build a better widget to sell you, so you can get in their car trap, you can buy their house gadget, you can buy their coffee maker, and live your, you know, nice life. Yeah. Whereas, you know, Amazon came around and they said, well, sell books here. You know, create your own store. People don't just make money; they make millions of dollars on Amazon stores. Oh, yeah. Have inventory in their garage, and they sell stuff all the time if you learn how to do it properly.
Right.
And you know, Google, same thing. Like, I have a website, and Google's SEO is important to getting people to go see it. And they own YouTube, and YouTube's another important platform.
Yeah.
It's the second largest search engine. Do you know that?
After Google.
Which I'm sure is fodder for argument against on the left for that. Yeah. Now they own number 1 and number 2.
This can't be.
It's the end of the world. All right.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on Business is Business by Berton Braley?
I hope I have owned up to the positions of the big man properly.
The big man.
And may
Definitely.
everyone listening engage in the true romance that is business.
Okay. All right, man.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on. I appreciate
Absolutely, yeah.
it. All right, bro.
We'll do this next time. Bring your equipment out to Hong Kong, okay?
All right, maybe. Well, I now have this. And I can bring this
portable,
and
right?
mics. I would need to bring different mics, though, I think.
Okay.
But yeah, it's portable.
All
So
right.
It's easy, for sure.
Very cool.
For sure. All right.
Good deal. Thank you,
you.
Kirk.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We can turn that one off. For me?
Oh, good timing, too.